So I'm going to get started. We have a lot to talk about today. Welcome to the series of Facebook Live advice sessions hosted by ADDitude. This new endeavor is part of ADDitude's ongoing efforts to support readers during the pandemic. For more resources on living within the pandemic or anything else ADHD related, please visit ADDitudemag.com. Today's session will last about 45 minutes, and I invite you to submit your questions in the comments field or the chat. I'll aim to answer as many as I can. Please follow me on Facebook at Dr. Sharon Saline, where I post all kinds of information and updates, and would just love to have you in my community. So I would like to start by teaching a little teeny bit about social anxiety. Social anxiety stems from an overwhelming fear that people will judge you so negatively that you will be devastated by their reactions. And when you worry so much about the negative judgment from others, you can't really be yourself, make rewarding friendships, or build a satisfying life. Instead, social anxiety blocks you every step of the way. Social anxiety happens more frequently than you may think. Despite your belief that you're alone with these struggles, studies have shown that 12.1% of all adults experience social anxiety disorder at some time in their lives, and it's one of the most common of all of the anxiety disorders. And that statistic is from the National Institute of Mental Health. So I see that some of you are putting some questions in already, which is fantastic, and I'm going to get started with those, and then I have some here that people have submitted in advance. Roxanne from Philly, my hometown, love to meet you, Roxanne. Any suggestions on how to keep an ADHD ODD 14-year-old interested in online school? She has little to no interest in the classwork, but will do homework with me every night. I think she's missing the one-on-one she gets from teachers in school. Well, I actually really agree with you on that. I think it's very hard for many students to pay attention right now to online school. It's not very rewarding. It's not engaging. They're just tired of it. They find it boring. And so the fact that your 14-year-old can engage with you when it's time to do the homework lets me know that that is what she's missing, that one-on-one. I think would be important if you could talk to the school so that she might be able to get some one-on-one Zoom time with someone who can help her, trudge through her work. Expecting her to do that on her own might be too much. It's not necessarily about social anxiety, but I want to answer that. Julie Zimmerman, how to best address distorted thinking as it relates to social anxiety? So that's a great question, because anxiety is composed of a physiological response, worried thoughts, cognition, and distorted beliefs, psychology. And so the first thing that we want to do is try to identify what are some of those distorted beliefs. What are the ways in which we are, what are the ways in which, and what are the stories that we're telling ourselves about what other people are thinking of us that are completely not related to what's going on in the moment. They're based on past experiences and projections of those past experiences into the present. It's like you're thinking about what someone else is thinking about you, and you don't really know that. We don't know what's inside other people's head. So I think the first thing to deal with those distorted beliefs is identify them, and not to be mad at yourself about them, but just make a list. What are some of the beliefs that you have about yourself socially? People won't like you. People will argue with you. People will judge you because you're short, or you're tall, or you're blonde, or you're a brunette, or you have curly hair, or you have straight hair. We have ideas about those beliefs, and what we really want to do, most importantly, is to identify those distorted beliefs, because then we can start to deal with them. When you've identified a distorted belief, I would pick one, because there's probably several. Pick one and write down what the opposite of that belief is, what the truth is. If the belief is people don't like me because I'm short, what would the opposite be? People don't like me because they don't know me. Or people may judge me because I'm short, but they don't actually know who I am. We want to bring in some fact-based thinking to counter those distorted beliefs. And that's where you want to start, with the first distorted belief, so that when it pops into your head, you can say something reassuring to yourself, redirecting to yourself, just like our GPS says to us when we get lost, recalculating. Michelle asks, any suggestion on why a teen doing remote schooling hides their face during class? It frustrates the teachers. They mark him absent all the time. They don't understand. How do you explain it to others? You know, it's so interesting because one of my one of my clients who's 14 told me, maybe she's not quite 14, almost 14, I asked her, you know, what are the things that stress you out? And one of the things she said is being seen and talking in class. I'm afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing. Because I'm on screen, everybody's looking at me. It's different when you're in a class, unless you're in a class where all the seats are in a circle. But otherwise, in a class, you're all facing forward. So if you say something and somebody smirks, or someone disagrees with you, they're not looking at you directly. And that looking at you directly can be very disarming for a lot of kids. So what we want to help the school understand is that not showing your face isn't disrespectful. It's about anxiety. It's about fear of being rejected or teased or something negative. And so I think it's important to try to find a way that your child could participate that might be easier. Maybe it's easier to write something in the chat than to say it out loud. Hey, Harlan, nice to see you. Always great when you're joining. Let's see. Kathy asks, would you consider a 5th grader who becomes a class clown or swears in an attempt to be cool dealing with social anxiety? If so, how do you address this? Of course, I would consider that to be dealing with social anxiety. One of the reasons that they're trying to be the class clown is because they want to be accepted. They want people to like them. And so they're making jokes, some of which may work and some of which may fall flat. This would also be true with swearing. You know, I'm trying to put on a persona to be accepted by others. I think the best way to deal with that is to talk with your child, and to ask them, you know, what are things that make people like someone, you know, and how hard do you have to try to do that? And what are things that actually you think might make people like you, but actually turn them, you know, away from you? And so while sometimes swearing you think may look cool, who is it looking cool to? And is that who you really are? Or just the persona, the hat that you're putting on to show other kids that you're cool? And what is cool anyway? You know, who are the cool kids? What does it mean to be a cool kid? It's really important to kind of just talk about some of these things, maybe not all at once, but take a walk with your kid, or bake cookies, or when you're in the car. Sometimes it's hard to have these conversations face to face, but it is important to talk about this. Hi, Rochelle from Australia. Becky, I'm looking for strategies for our son to be less prompt dependent. Okay, that isn't right away about social anxiety, but what I want to say is that, you know, a lot of kids with ADHD need scaffolding longer than you think. Prompts are cues, and cues redirect kids or remind them of things that they have to do. They comprise what we call scaffolding. One way that you could prompt less is to have a list of what needs to be done in the order that it needs to be done, or a post-it board. One of my families, that 14-year-old I was talking about, made a post-it board with things that have to get done, and she and her 8-year-old brother move things from one side to the other, and then, you know, during the day, and then they go back the next day and they get started. And so you can remind your child to look at the board or look at the list instead of you telling them. This helps them actually learn the steps of organization and planning, and have a sense of personal competence. But I have to say that the cueing lasts for a while, because working memory is something that is often challenged with kids who have ADHD and adults, or slower processing speed. And so they may need those cues for a while. I would sit down and talk about what kinds of reminders work and what kinds of reminders don't, and what sort of things which tasks you want to remind them and which tasks you don't. Kim asks, how do I manage anger at bedtime? My daughter stalls and stalls and becomes angry that she doesn't have more time to play. She's 8. It can be a nightly battle. This is a great question, Kim, and this is a question really about routines, whether it's bedtime or waking up in the morning. But a lot of times for kids who have ADHD, they stall because they want to play, but they also stall because they have trouble unwinding, or the unwinding process might be frightening for them. And so what we want to do is try to teach them, how do you slow yourself down to get ready for bed? And so I would create some sort of incentive program. If when, you give a warning, like let's say every night she gets a story automatically, but she loves stories, right? And she wants to have as many stories as possible. What you could do is say, this night, you're going to get a story every night. But if you want a second story and maybe a third story, you'll need to stop when I count to 3, and stop what you're doing and move on to the next exercise. So I'm going to actually, hi Jennifer, stick with the questions related to anxiety from now on, because that's why a lot of us are here. Lisa asks, how does one work through those physiological aspects of social anxiety? For example, when asked a question unexpectedly, your face turns red and you get an overall uncomfortable feeling. I think that's really tough to do. I think it's hard to manage when your face gets red. I mean, it's an unconscious response. But I think if you could actually figure out some ways to deactivate, that would help. Some breathing would be great. Maybe put your hand on your belly and breathe into your hand and feel it, move in and out a few times. The red feeling shows that you're under stress, right? You're embarrassed. I know I'm a blusher myself. And so what I have to do in those moments is deal with my judgment about myself. And the only way that I can deal with my judgment is to take a breath and say, I'm doing the best I can in this moment. And that's really all we can ask of ourselves. Laura asks, my 10-year-old who was born with cleft and lip palate told me it was his dream come true being home virtual schooling. Over the last couple of years, we have noticed he has more social anxiety as he is more aware of his differences. I worry how he will adjust when he has to go back into the world again. This is really tough. I've worked with some people who have cleft palate or other sort of physical differences, and these kids are so self-conscious, and honestly, kids can be mean. My question, I guess, that I would want to ask you, Laura, is, does your son have a few friends? If he has 1 or 2 friends who have his back, the important thing of going back when he returns to school is that he's in a classroom with these people with whom he feels safe, who he can connect with. Because if you have a few people who are your posse, then you feel like you can move in the world with more ease. And that's what we want for someone like your son. We can't help him deal with people who you deal with or predict anyone who's going to perhaps be cruel or tease him. We can give him some one-liners in response, and we can help him rely on his friendships for comfort in those tough moments. Jennifer, my son has a very hard time at bed, as well as Kim. To cope with being scared before going to bed, he stays up late, and then mornings are a beast. Any suggestions on working through bedtime anxiety? I saw this great video. I don't know if you've seen it. It's on YouTube, about monster spray. It's hilarious. And it's about a little kid who his mom, makes air freshener. I think I mentioned this before, and sprays it. They open the door and they spray it into the closet so he doesn't have to be afraid of the monster that's in the closet. I think it would be important to understand what your son is afraid of about going to bed in the dark, and maybe to come up with some nighttime ritual that you do together. Maybe it's listening to a particular meditation tape. Maybe it's listening to some music, reading a story, doing some breathing or a relaxation exercise. I think that can be really helpful. We want to understand what the anxiety is and what it's saying so we can come up with a counteraction to that. Julie asks, is social anxiety something that will improve, or will teens grow and mature out of it with time and maturity in addition to therapy? I think they can. I think definitely they can move beyond social anxiety when they have the tools they need and that they feel confident with to talk and engage with other people. So we want practice as much as possible, interventions, and some self-confidence. Thanks for sharing that article about that's written by a former class clown. I appreciate that. Where do we find schedules to follow for kids who struggle with breaking things down? So ADDitude has shared something for that. Harlan, I'm coming up with a growing list of clients' families who seem to think of accommodations as unilateral instead of cooperation, collaboration. Any ways to communicate from your experience how it's a multiple way street? So, I don't think that top-down anxiety solutions ever work, because top-down anxiety solutions actually convey a certain kind of dismissal to kids about, like, oh, you'll be fine, don't worry about it. Or, it's not a big deal, it's okay. It doesn't validate or honor the fear that they're actually experiencing. And so we want to do, and that's true for adults too. So what we want to do actually is to insist on collaborating with kids to understand the anxiety and how it operates, because anxiety is part of a natural way of living. It's part of being human. We can't dismiss it totally. It's how we evolved. What we want to do instead is learn how to manage it. And the way that we're going to learn how to manage it is by understanding it and its fearful demands. And that requires working together. So instead of, I'm worried about going into school, I haven't seen people in a long time, instead of saying, oh, you'll be fine, don't worry about it. You want to say it's natural to worry in that situation. Of course you're concerned. You haven't seen people. Let's practice what you might say to one or two kids that would help break the ice. It definitely is a multiple way street. Michelle says, my 16-year-old is also very social distance at family get-togethers. Is this normal? I can't really judge if that's normal because I don't know your 16-year-old and some of the challenges. Some 16-year-olds at family get-togethers would rather be anywhere else. And so they may socially distance because they just don't really want to engage. They don't want to talk to people about how they're doing. They don't want Aunt Josie to, pull their cheek and say, oh, so good to see you. You've gotten so big. Tell me how your grades are. That's not something they want to engage in. So I think that what we want to do is to teach our kids how to engage, even peripherally with people, kind of on a light series of topics. And then if they need to sit by themselves to regroup, that's probably okay. How soon before bed should I start the bedtime process? Well, I think that you should start the bedtime process at least a half hour before bed. If they're already in their pajamas. If they're not in their pajamas and they haven't taken a bath or brushed their teeth, then you're going to need at least an hour, depending on, all the things they have to do and how quickly they do them. Let's see. Thanks for those friendly meditation ideas. Those are great. Annie. These are good ideas, but how do you get a child to follow them when they are already deep into an anxiety episode? This is a great question, Donna. And Donna's question is something that I think is absolutely worth talking about. What do you do when someone is already in a panic, when they're deep in the anxiety? So at this point, when they're deep in the anxiety, the thinking brain has basically checked out and gone to the Bahamas, and the amygdala, the feeling brain, comes out, and it is now driving our brain, what Daniel Siegel calls flipping your lid. And so what we want to do is to try to get that amygdala back into the back seat of the car. If we have the frontal lobes are the driver, and then the back seat is the emotional brain, and then the trunk is the physiological brain, the reptilian brain. We want that amygdala move back. So how are you going to do that? We've got to calm the physiological system down. And in the middle of a panic, what we want is to have some agreed upon tools that we've talked about when there's not a panic going on that you can apply to this moment. So listening to music, perhaps some yoga breathing, perhaps taking a walk outside, things that can distract you. Being present with your kid, validating their fear, not judging it, not judging them, letting them know you're right here, you're going to be on their side, and together you're going to tackle this anxiety. We're here, we've just got to settle so we can get our thinking brain back into the driver's seat. So let's focus on that. We will deal with the problem that's caused the anxiety later. We need to get you to settle down. It's very, very important to do that. And that might take a while. It might mean singing a song to them. It might mean maybe playing a card game. It might mean, running around the yard. Whatever they need to do to get themselves in a more centered place with their feeling brain not running the show. Kim asks, how do you respond to kids who say, I don't have any friends? Is it appropriate as a parent to be requesting that they have one friend in their class when the school week next year starts? My daughter struggles badly. She expects that her friends are her only friend and is sad when others decide to play with someone else. She feels rejected. So you can't be with your friends all the time. It just doesn't work that way. And sometimes your friends are friends with each other. I mean, I'm sure that's happened to all of us. We're friends, we introduce people to each other, and then they become good friends. And you're like, whoa, wait a minute. What's my role here? What's my place? Just because people are friends with each other doesn't mean they like you any less. But your daughter probably suffers from some social anxiety, and she feels easily rejected. And when other people are doing something that does not include her. So what I would, I would definitely ask that she's in a class with a friend. That's important to her. But I would also make sure she has more than one friend. It's a big burden on the one person who's her friend to be her only go-to. So we want to try to nurture some other friendships. And you can help with this by having other people, not so much right now, but maybe have someone come over, or take someone who she's sort of friends with and go somewhere together. Maybe go to a movie. Again, this is not during COVID, or take a walk, or go ice skating, or go out for a fun food and eat it outside. Something where you can facilitate their being together. Because for a lot of kids with ADHD, they don't know what to say, when to say it, or how to say it. And so they might need you kind of present and involved, or present and not so present, depending on their age. Julie asks, what are some of the tools to combat social anxiety in addition to your example of writing down the opposite of the fear? So another thing that I think would be helpful when you're dealing with social anxiety is to try to have if you're with someone in a situation, get some feedback. Maybe you're on a Zoom call with your sister and your aunt and your parents, and you have a good relationship with your sister, and you could ask, did it seem like I was saying the wrong thing? Or what did you notice when this happened? One of the problems with social anxiety is that your feedback mechanism isn't working very well. You're assuming the worst from people and not being able to shrug something off, or let it go, or tell yourself, it's okay. Everybody does this or that sometimes. And this is actually tangentially related to the rejection sensitivity dysphoria that we talked about several weeks ago. So I think that the important thing, in addition to writing down the opposite, what you want to say to yourself when a thought comes up that's putting you down, because that's part of the problem. These thoughts are coming into your head and you can't stop them. You need to stop them. And that's a really cognitive behavioral therapy tool. You also want to be able to have something to say to the thought. So you can stop the thought, you can say something that's the opposite of the thought, or thanks for letting me know, I don't need to deal with that right now. And to get some feedback from people when you're in situations with someone you trust about how you're actually being perceived rather than what you think you are. Okay, Bert, you want to know about social anxiety versus rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Okay, so that's great because that's a perfect lead-in. So, rejection sensitivity dysphoria and social anxiety are linked. And social anxiety is a diagnosable condition via, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. I mean, it's something that's treated with cognitive behavioral therapy. There's a long history of it. Rejection sensitivity dysphoria, I think, is a part of social anxiety. It's not the whole thing. You're sensitive to rejection, which then makes you anxious in a situation. Social anxiety also comes from certain triggers. There are specific things that trigger you, and that goes back to what Julie was asking about. There are things that trigger you in certain situations, and how do you want to respond to those triggers? And having a little bit of planning will give you some preparation to deal with those concerns. I hope that answered your question. Elizabeth, could you review the signs of social anxiety in kids and young adults so that we know how to identify it? Well, I think the signs of social anxiety are pretty straightforward. I think it would be, an avoidance of public speaking, an avoidance of going into new situations, being in groups of people. These are all signs of social anxiety. Feeling bad about yourself after you've been around people because you've said or done something that you think was the wrong thing and everyone will remember forever. And I think feeling like you don't really have any friends and actually not having any friends. So it's one thing to feel like you don't have friends, but you actually have some like good friends, maybe three or four friends that you socialize with regularly. It's another thing to feel like you don't have any good friends because you are a child who doesn't have any friends. And in that latter situation, as parents, we have to help our kids facilitate these connections. And the way that we can do that is by having family gatherings with other families where you're around to help ease the path, to help ease the connections. And having a family gathering takes the pressure off of your child being one-on-one with someone. Instead, everyone's together. Maybe we're all having pizza or watching a movie, or we're having a bonfire outside. And making s'mores. These reduce the pressure on that one-to-one interaction. Freddie says, I'm a single father of 5. My oldest, 16-year-old daughter and only girl, has social anxiety, perhaps RSD, and continues to have issues communicating with her narcissistic mother, whom she sees once a week. She desires a relationship with her mother, but constantly feels rejected and shuts down. This is awful to watch. Please tell me there's something I can or should do. Oh, Freddie, boy, that's a lot. There's a couple good books out there that might not be appropriate for your daughter, but maybe you could read. One of them is called The Good Enough Daughter. And there's another book called Why Is It Always About You? And I think one thing that would help your daughter is understanding a little bit more about narcissism. Of course, there's Alice Miller's fantastic book, which is, several decades old, called The Drama of the Gifted Child. Your daughter wants a relationship with her mother, and she wants her mother to see her. but her mother is not capable of seeing her the way she wants to be seen. And so it's like going to a dry well for water over and over again. Instead, what I would encourage you to do, since you're the parent who has your daughter more, is to sit down and talk about what is the, channel of connection or love that the mother is actually broadcasting on, and can your daughter tune into that and get the connection, some of the connection there that she desires. That's really would be helpful for her, because she's tuning into a channel that her mother is not going to be able to broadcast on, and then she's always coming up disappointed. So those are my suggestions. Susan asks, my son started hyperventilating, but is quite aggressive when I suggest deep breaths. So deep breaths are not a good thing for him in that case. What I would suggest is some sort of physical activity. Marching, turning on some music, maybe doing a little dancing, jumping jacks, something that gets that energy to a different place. Breathing is often very difficult for kids, and they're like, ugh, I hate breathing. I mean, that's what I personally like to recommend yoga breathing for that reason, which is this breathing in and out of one nostril at a time. Because it gives them something to do. Taking deep breaths could result in hyperventilation. So if he doesn't want to deep breathe, that's fine. What else would he like to do? Do you want to pop out a downward dog, some yoga? What is going to help him that's not deep breathing? But you have to create those options when he's not anxious, and then apply them when he is, with the agreement having been made when he's anxious that that's what you're going to do. Okay, I think the link afterwards is here. I'm not sure. Not sure my teen would feel, Julie says, would feel comfortable enough to ask for feedback. Okay, so if your teen is not comfortable enough to ask for feedback, what you might want to do, if she is open to this, is maybe doing a role play or two, where she is herself or she's the teen. And that would kind of help kind of practice the skills where you might be able to give her some feedback. And the feedback that you'd give her would have to be very neutral, based on observation. I see this, I notice this, I observe that. There seems to be mostly parents on here. I think I'm the only kid. Hey, Mel, welcome. Awesome. So glad to have you. I have a specific question for you after I answer your question, if you don't mind. There seems to be mostly, I'm the only kid. My mom sent some sort of link here. Okay. So Mel, what we're talking about is social anxiety. And I'm really glad you're here. Thanks. And so if you have any challenges with anxiety in a social situation, put it in the chat. And also, I'd love to ask your question is that, we're thinking here at ADDitude of doing a webinar just for teens on anxiety, and and COVID. And I'm wondering if you had any tips for us on how we might want to do that. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your feedback. Lori asks, my 10-year-old nephew is really resistant to ask neighbor friends out to go out and play, and shrugs off the suggestion, but seems sad about it. And his parents comment that he's too shy. I suspect any fear he has about being the one to do the inviting is probably distorted and related to fear of rejection. But the kids seem nice, actually. I'm like to gently encourage him, but not push at any ideas. He defaults to playing video games instead at times, but not often with a friend, virtually. I empathize with his feelings as I was a child with unchecked social anxiety and ADD, rejection sensitivity too, and I'm still working on many aspects of that, but don't know how to best help or if I should just butt out, LOL. Well, I think you've already put yourself in, so it's a little late to butt out. And you obviously care and love your nephew a lot. It might help with the nephew if the parents would help him in some way. Like, could they arrange something, or could he ask one neighbor, or could he just maybe make a first step out to watch them play. If he's out there watching them play, they might naturally invite him. Or if his mom or his dad is open, is to calling the parents if they're friends with the parents and saying, hey, I think my son would like to pray, but he's really kind of shy about asking. Do you think your son, if he's outside, might just invite him to join them? That would be so amazing. They might say yes. Mel, does he have friends online? Nowadays, kids might like friends online, like Discord or something. It's easier to talk to people online. I agree, Mel. I think that's a really good point, that sometimes for people who can't really talk in person, the online gaming relieves them of that face-to-face pressure. And it's important to know how to talk to people face-to-face. It's just it's a good skill. And I think there is something, important and fulfilling about having some in-person friends. You don't have to have 17, but one or two is really great. And it does break up the monotony. And actually, the skills that you have developed online could translate into in-person. Shasta, I would like to ask questions, but feel uncomfortable sharing since this is marked public. Is there any way around this? I don't really think so, but I have to say, I think this community is super accepting and non-judgmental and would welcome you with open arms. Donna, is there a book for a 10-year-old that can help understand anxiety and ADHD that a child will read? There are some books. They're books for younger kids, but they're still like reasonable for a 10-year-old with ADHD to read. There's one called You've Got Dragons, and there's another one. There's a series of them called Scaredy Squirrel, and there's another one that I can't think of. It's the Worry something or another. I think all of those could be useful, and everybody loves picture books, so I'd give them a try. Okay, thanks, Mel. I appreciate your saying that. Quora is a good app where you can request people with credentials to answer questions for you. I think that's a great idea. If you have some questions, Shasta, you may email me separately, and I could try to answer them that way. Susan, okay, you're welcome. Freddie, you're welcome. Susan, can we find links to resources after the webinar? Yes, I believe they're posted. All right, Shasta, great. Oh, Harlan, you're welcome. I love doing it, and it's so great. I so appreciate your enthusiasm. Let's see. Oh, thank you, Susan. That is so kind. I really appreciate that. And we are at 4:39, and I have made it to the end of the questions. So I'm going to just answer a question that someone asked because we have a little time, or if anyone wants to ask another question, that would be great. Gamito says, I feel that a lot of times I genuinely do want to socialize and get to know people, but trauma, rejection, and fear of rejection disables me from doing it. Should I fight these feelings to achieve the goals I have for my life, or should I just accept this as my brain and my situation? I would say yes, and to those questions. Yes, you should accept that this is your brain, and you should find a way to not just embrace these feelings, but then deal with them, because you have a lot to offer. You want to socialize and get to know people, and that's important. And maybe what you need to do is break your goals down into smaller pieces. That often helps people with social anxiety. Instead of like, oh, I have to go to this party, maybe I just want to, go sit at a lunch table with a few people I know, or, go outside and try to play with some neighborhood kids who are, playing kicker. Let's see. Kim says, my daughter tends to have break meltdowns at family events such as birthdays. She gets overwhelmed and goes to her room. Sometimes family will joke when she comes back out to the gathering, leaving her devastated. All right, so Kim, I'm sure that that is not okay with you, and I'm going to tell you that is not okay with me. So in advance of your next family gathering, I would send out an email to everybody who's coming and say, here's the deal. My daughter struggles socially, and if she actually comes out and or gets overwhelmed and then gets overwhelmed and need to leave to her room, it would be, I'm asking you not to comment on her having left the room when she comes back in any way. Just act like it's normal, like she went to the bathroom and she came back. I think it's really important to help people understand how they need to respond in these situations, because they think it's okay to joke, and really what they're doing is putting her down. I have some feelings about this, as you may be able to tell. Of course, Shasta, I understand. Susan, share your book. Yes, I think that sounds great. I'd love to see it. Send it over to me. Paula asks, how do you help a preteen who experiences social anxiety at a high level but denies it, that they have it, and refuses help? So what I would say to you, Paula, is I would basically share your observations very succinctly and very carefully at certain times. Hey, you know what? I notice that you have some nervousness. Maybe not call it social anxiety, but use terms that's how they talk about their social anxiety, because there's a difference between like social anxiety, which is a clinical term, and, oh God, I'm really nervous around people. The nervousness is near their experience, okay? And that's where we're going to get their buy-in to work with you on it, versus anxiety, which is a label, and no one wants to have that. Let's see. Okay, you're welcome. And this is the last question. Have you heard of a mental health diagnostic kit where the child swabs their cheek and sends it back to the lab, and the doctor gets results which tells them which medications will work best for the child and dosage levels? My pediatrician called in the pediatric psychiatrist, and we are doing it. Sounds so cool. I've never heard of it. Yes, Whitney, I have heard of that. These saliva tests have very mixed reviews. Some people swear by them. Some people think they're, you know, kind of a bit of hooey. But I think that it is valuable if you're going to feel more confident about particularly if you've burned through a bunch of medications that haven't worked, and I think some people are very helpful, find it very helpful to have a little bit of a map. So, you know, it really depends on what makes sense to you. Oh, thank you so much, Kim. I really appreciate that. I do my best to put complicated things into terms everybody can understand and access. And for those of you who are celebrating a holiday next Thursday, as I am, although in a truncated form, very truncated. I wish you a lovely week. We will not be meeting next Friday, and we will meet again the Friday after that. So stay posted for the theme of that week. And I hope that everyone is staying healthy and safe as the COVID numbers are rising. My thoughts and prayers are with all of you. Take care, and thanks so much for joining.